Okay, so today we're going to do a eye painting video. We're doing The Little Dreamer, and we're doing blue eyes today because that seems to be the most popular. For eye painting, I use 4 brushes basically. I use a 10-aught filbert. I use an 18-aught round brush. I use this one is a really old brush. It's a filbert, and it's kind of like a cat's tongue. And then this is a 18-aught script liner. So these are the 4 brushes that I use the most in eye painting. So to start with, I have to do the eyelid and get that defined.
Do you want to remind me what's already done on the eye as far as the white? You've already painted like a...
Yeah, the whites have already been done. The vinyl sealer has been put on. Okay. She's got her wash, her nails, her lips, everything. So this is the point where we start painting the eyes.
Okay.
And first of all, before we start doing colors, we have to define the top of the eyes and the eyelids. So we're going to start out with some carbon black. And I'm using my script liner for this because you want a real fine line and you want to get any excess off your brush, even if you have to do more than one layer. Because this is going to be your lash line whenever you get your eyes painted. You can add to this later too. It's just, you want to make sure you have it in there before you start painting the eye color. So the next thing I'm going to do is the eyelid, because it needs to have some shading done on it. And I'm going to be mixing the carbon black with some of the brown earth. Just gives us more of a brown tone without quite so much red in it. You don't want your paint to be too dry, so you have to just keep adding a little bit of water at a time for it. Alright, so then I'm going to do this crease in the eyelid. I just want to do it real soft for now because you're going to add to it later when we get to do a video on the lashes and brows. We'll get more information on that. Alright, so now we have the upper lid defined. I'm going to take this filbert, I guess it's called. It's a little bit wider, and so I just barely get a little bit of paint on it. And then we're going to go in between these over where the eye, where you will be painting the iris itself, because that's where you're going to be doing most of your shading. So I just want to put a little bit in here for now. Okay, looks like I got just a little bit out of the line here. Toothpicks are a lifesaver when you paint dolls because you can take any mess up off with them. There's a little bit of black here I wanted to get out. So now we're ready to do the eyes. With Dianna's gaze technique, it's kind of hard to explain, but you want to Since I'm doing blue eyes, I'm going to use the French blue. And you just want to mark your place where your pupil is going to be. And you usually go, you're going to try to find the middle of the eye here, up and down. And you just want to put a little bit of line in there so you can see. This is about the middle of the eye, up and down. Same with this one. And then you're going to go this way. And there are instructions written that Dianna used when she was teaching porcelain painting, and it's a lot more explanatory than just watching me do it. And it also depends on where you want your eyes placed. You know, if you want them looking sideways or something, then it's a little different method. So the written instructions will be included in this so that you can understand it better. It's kind of hard to explain, but I'm kind of just putting a little X in the very middle here. And when you look at it, you want to see if it's kind of like what if it looks like she's looking at you. You're going to be adding an actual pupil, and that's when it's most important. But you know, just kind of look at it and see if it's about where it needs to be. So then we're going to go ahead and add just a little dot in here for the pupil. And usually in the gaze technique, one eye is a little closer to the corner of the eye than the other one, just slightly. So we're going to put our pupil right in the middle of this X here. On this side.
What color are you using?
This is the French blue. And I'm just using it because I'm going to be doing blue eyes. It's going to get, you won't ever see it when it's all done. But and then for this eye, because it's going to be going in just a slight bit more, we're going to put the dot to one side of that X. And if you were going to make her looking sideways, you know, then you would have to adjust it accordingly. She looks a little cross-eyed right now, but once you get her whole pupil put in, it won't look that way. And then you just draw a circle around that about how big you're going to want your pupil to be. This is a very small eye, so it's kind of hard to determine that completely, but we'll do the best we can. So I'm going to try to kind of fill that in and make it about the size that I would want it to be when it's all done. I'm not doing it real dark because I may have to alter that as I paint. So I'm just kind of making the circle a little bigger around that original one. You have to be able to compare them and, you know, make sure they're the same size. And and if you wanted her looking up, you'd have to move them up a little further too. I'm not wanting her necessarily to look up so much. We just want to have kind of a straight gaze. So now that I've got them about the same size, it helps me if I cover and look at one eye at a time and see if she's looking at me. And see, this one I believe she's looking up a little more, and this one I think needs to be moved out just a tiny bit. So I'm going to do that before I darken anything. can still change this as we go. It's kind of hard to know for sure until you get your whole eye in there, and then you can kind of make changes as need be. So for now, I'm going to stop right there, and we're going to go ahead and outline the eye. And I'm just going to use the French blue for that as well. And then we'll add more color to it as we go. But we just want to try to get an even circle around that pupil. And for some reason, this paint is just not wanting to. I'm gonna have to try to get some water and see if I can make it show up. Once you get your shape, you want to try to get it equal distance around the pupil. Once we get the general shape, then we'll add a little more color to it to define it. Same with this one. We'll try to make them the same size. It's just something that you have to kind of alter as you go. You know, it's kind of hard to determine it until you see them both, and then you can do work on them. You want them to be the same size, so okay, so I've got them outlined, but I'm gonna have to darken it now so that I can really see the shape and make sure they're the same size. So I'm gonna use some of the Payne's Gray. This is a really good outline color for a blue eye. So we're going to kind of go over that I just did. These paints are really wet right now, so they're kind of watery. You have to keep turning it and getting your basic shape. Once I get both eyes outlined, then I turn it upside down to see how it looks, if it looks round, because that's a really good way to tell. Your eye will kind of drop down under the eyelid as you go. All right, so I'm going to turn this upside down, and it looks pretty round. And as I go, I can add a little to make them the same size, or whatever I need to do to. But for now, the shape is pretty good on them. So the next thing we're going to do is mix the blue for the eyes. I use a little bit of Payne's Gray and an equal amount of the ultramarine blue, and then I'm going to add some titanium white. And you can see that makes a pretty nice blue eye. Then I'm going to take the 18-aught round brush.
Can you scoot her just that way a little bit? There we go, good.
And dip it in this blue. And we're just going to kind of go around that pupil. Get your blue color in there. And I'll probably put another coat of that on in just a minute and give it time to dry. But you're seeing the basic eye coming together. If you don't wait for your paint to dry, sometimes it'll pull it off when you put a second coat on. So you want to make sure it's dry before you add any more to it. If your paint starts drying out on your palette, you can always touch a little water to it to keep it moist. Normally, if I was going to paint a doll with this fresh palette, I would mix the paint on the palette and let it set overnight, and then open it in the morning and mix my colors together, because then it's had time to absorb the water from the sponge, and I think the paints work better that way. But for now, we're going to go with what we're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and put my second coat of blue on the eyes. Build up the color a little bit. And now again, I want to hold her up out of the light so that I can see if she's looking at me. And she's doing pretty good. It's better when you're not under the light, if you can actually hold her out in front of you a little ways and get her out of the light, and you can really see more about how she's looking at you. But we have to have the light for this, so so now I'm going to start darkening her pupils, and I'm also using this round 18-aught brush for that. And I'm going to start by adding a little more of the Payne's Gray first to see that they're both the same size and everything before I start adding black to them. So we're going to touch up this one. Try to get a nice circle. Okay. This paint is a little wet, so it's not. It's not working the way I want it to. Now we're getting there. And it's good to let your paint dry before you add another coat too, because otherwise, like I said, it can just pull your paint off if you do it too soon. I think I need to. So now we got to let that dry before we add the black, and then I can tell more about how if they're even and looking the same way and all of that. And then it's just a matter, once you get your pupil in, it's just a matter of building up your colors and doing your shading. You're going to have shading over the top of the pupil that, you know, will not give her such a starry look. Right now she kind of looks like a deer in the headlights. I'll try putting just a little bit of black on now. Now see, to me it still looks like this pupil is lower than that one, so now is a good time to change that before it gets too far along. I think we need to lower this one just a little bit. So I'm going to avoid putting too much paint on the top of it. And bring it down a little further on the bottom. I got a little bit out of the line there, so I'm going to have to go back and try to repair that. While it's still wet, sometimes you can just take it right off. You can add a little more blue to the eyes. I'm going to have to hold her up for just a minute so I can I can look at her. Okay, I think she's pretty good. So we just have to keep building up the pupil, the black in the pupil as it dries. It's probably best if your black isn't really, really wet when you're doing the pupils. Just enough to be able to move it without it spreading all over. So I'm taking a little bit out of this up here where it's not quite as wet. And you kind of have to keep looking to see if you're keeping your shape and if they're about the same size. Don't want one too much bigger than the other. Although I heard yesterday a medical examiner say that people's pupils don't always match, that one can be bigger than the other. Never knew that before. But you want them to try to look as close to the same as you can. So we're going to go with that. Probably going to need one more layer when this dries a little bit to make them really black. So we'll let that dry for just a minute. So as you can see, this is kind of the guideline I've been following, and this will also be included at the end of the video so that you'll have it to refer to. The instructions are made for China paint, so you just kind of have to ignore that part of it, but it'll give you the guidelines for doing the gaze technique. So it's very helpful. Even after all these years, I still refer to it. All right, let's see if we can get the last coat of black on the eyes here. Just a little bit more. still need a little bit more on this one. While that's drying, I'm going to take a little bit more of the iris color and just kind of touch up around those pupils. Once those dry, then we can start doing the shading. Now we're going to have to intensify the black over the eyes for the lash line. Brush off your excess. Oh, still too much on there. Okay. Now to do the shading on the blue eyes, above the pupil, you're going to use a little bit of the Payne's Gray. And we're just going to, got a little fuzz on there.
When you say pupil, are you referring to the whole colored part or just the black?
No, the black is the pupil, and the blue, the light blue, is the iris.
Okay.
So right now I'm shading over the pupil,
okay,
the top part of the iris. And I'm also going to add a little more into the sides, the outline of the eye. And just kind of avoid putting very much at the very base, because that's kind of, the lower part of the eye is a little more hidden. You don't usually see the whole eye. It's usually kind of hidden under the lower lid.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to just do a little light circle around the pupil with that Payne's Gray.
Oh, what does that do?
Well, I don't want the pupil to look really stark black circle. You want to add a little bit of softness to it, I guess you'd say.
Sure.
So that's what I'm doing right now. Still need a little more here. And it's good too, when you're doing this, once you get the outline again, you want to turn it upside down and look at it and see, you know, if you're still keeping a pretty good roundness to the eye. Let me finish shading this one a little bit. Alright, so I'm going to go around that one a little bit. Alright, now we're going to take some of the black and we're going to mix it with the Payne's Gray for a black-blue color. And we're going to even define it more now with that. Get some highlight back up here. It just depends on how, you know, what color blue you're trying to achieve, how much shading you want to do, you know, how dark you want the outline. And then I just take and kind of pull really tiny little lines out from the black pupil, just to kind of soften the look of it. If you look at a person's eye, you kind of see a spray of color coming from the pupil.
Mm-hmm.
Might got too much. You just have to go really delicately with it. Okay. Now I'm going to turn it upside down. And it still looks like it's pretty even and pretty round. So I'm going to take a little bit of this French blue and just go along the bottom of the eye, right on the lid line. And then I'll take and mix a little bit of, let me get this cleaned off. I'm going to take a little bit of Payne's Gray and a little bit of this, I can never remember the name of that, smoked pearl. I just do it and I don't think about the colors.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to use this to do a little bit of a shading under the top lid.
So much color into such a small eye.
Yeah, it's a lot. This kind of, I think it probably needs to be a little bit darker yet. Whoops. When you're using a glass eye, you don't get to do all this shading, and so they look a little more starry than a hand-painted eye.
Mm-hmm.
And I just put a little under the top lid. And then we're going to mix some purple madder and some moss green. And we probably need a little bit of brown earth on this too. This is going to be the color that I'm going to use for the eyelid, so it's got to be almost pink, but a little darker than a pink. And we're going to just go right along the outer edge of the lower lid and into the tear duct. Don't want it too dark because you want it to look like a natural thing, but you want it to show. And then I'm going to mix a little bit of the burgundy and the burnt umber. And we're just going to outline the tear duct with that a tiny bit so that it's defined. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the eyelid again at the top with black, just over the eye, and you're going to bring it down to the top of the pupil. So that you don't see a gap between the eyelid and the top of the pupil. And that's pretty much a blue eye. The next step would be doing your lashes and your brows, and then the final step would be putting the diamond glaze over the eyes to make them shiny.